I hope y'all like this shirt because I got part of at least 4 videos to record this morning and I ain't changing. Welcome or welcome back. My name is Ari and today is my February wrap up. I feel like I had a bad month in February, but I still read a lot of books. I've had a couple of new followers recently, so if you're new here or you're not a follower and you're watching this for the first time, how I do my wrap-ups each month is I quickly talk about the books that I've read in this video because I usually read a lot and I don't want this to be an hour-long video. So if you want more detail on any one of the books that I talk about, I link all of the videos and my Goodreads reviews down in the description box so you can get a little bit more of how I felt about each book and maybe a description of the book if you don't know what it's about down there. As always, let's start this month off with stats, and I'm gonna scooch over here so I have room for that. I read 19 books in February for a total of 7,595 pages, which averaged out to 271 pages per day and an average of 400 pages per book. So I read quite a few very long books in February, and I think that's why I feel so burnt out right now. The genre of the books I read, fantasy comes out on top as always. I read 7 fantasy books, 6 romance books, 2 short story collections, 2 nonfictions, 1 general fiction, and 1 book of poetry. The authors I read from, 13 of them were female. That's pretty normal for me. I usually read way more female than male authors. 4 of them were male, and 2 of the books that I read had multiple authors of multiple genders. The source for my books, 7 of them were backlit, which means I bought them or received them before last month, and they're crowding up my shelves, which need more room. So reading off my own TBR shelves, 7 backlist titles. 4 of them I bought new this month, which I'm not supposed to do, but at least 2 of them were pre-orders. At least 2 of them were pre-orders. 4 from my library, 3 of them were ARCs, and 1 from a book box. The demographic of the books that I read, 13 of them were for an adult audience, 3 of them were young adult, and I actually read 3 middle grade novels this month, which is insane for me. I don't even think I read 3 middle grades the entire year last year. Format, 13 of them were physical books, 3 of them were ebooks, 2 audiobooks, and 1 that I read is a combination of both a physical book and an audiobook. And then 13 of the books had new to me authors, while 6 of them were authors that I had read from before. So I got to experience a whole lot of new authors this month. Unfortunately, the star ratings did not go well with reading new authors because I had a pretty abysmal month. I only had 1 5-star book the whole month, 4 4-star books, which really isn't great, 11 3-stars, so just a generically average month, 2 2-stars, and 1 1-star. Now, to be fair, the 1-star, I knew it was going to be a 1-star going into it, so I'm not really mad at that, but that average was pretty low for the month. I also didn't DNF any books 2 months in a row, so that's good, right? I didn't really feel the need to DNF any books other than that 1-star, but I was hate reading it at that point, so it's fine. Now, moving on, the pressing question that you all are probably here for. Did I complete my February Dungeons of Books TBR? Because if you watch my March TBR, I had only finished 2 out of the 6 books that I needed to read. So do I need to take a punishment right now, or did I finish it? I finished it. I read all of them. I told you guys I could read 4 books in a week. was right. Let's from there talk about the books that I read, and let's start with the arcs that I read. So I had 3 arcs, but one of those arcs was the Subtle Knife graphic novel by Philip Pullman, and I had read The Golden Compass and potentially even The Subtle Knife, but it had been so long that I didn't really remember anything about it. So the first book that I read in February was rereading The Golden Compass to set myself up for success in my arc journey. I read this as like the actual novel, not as the graphic novel, and it was fine. Then from there I went on to the Subtle Knife graphic novel. The story again was fine. It's not really for me. Philip Pullman's entire reason for writing this middle grade series is basically he didn't like that The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or whatever universe that is so religious and so about God. So Philip Pullman is a huge atheist, and he wrote this series about killing God. Which, that's, even if you're anti-religion, that's too much religion for me. And I just, it was too much. It was too much, and I didn't care. Also with the graphic novel specifically, the artwork was awful. The artwork changed the story so much for the worse that I was just not a fan of that at all. It was all in the characters' eyes. So if you are interested in reading that series, or you're interested in your children reading that series, I don't recommend the graphic novels. Just pick up the novels themselves and stick to that. The next arc that I read was Reclaim the Stars, which was edited by Zoraida Cordova. That's so hard to say quickly. This is a collection of short stories written by Latin American authors. And that's the entire premise, is they need to be fantasy, they need to be sci-fi, and they need to be written by Latin American authors. I did really like this. I like the stories. I didn't like the editing choices in this, on like the order that the stories went in, but the overall stories individually, I liked all of them. I don't think I would have given any individual story less than 3 stars. And the final arc that I read this month was The Obsidian Butterfly by Lady Forbes. This was the 3rd book in a young adult fantasy series that I've been reading basically as arcs the entire time that she's been writing it, and this is generic young adult fantasy. So if you like generic young adult fantasy, you'll like the storylines of this. The really cool thing about it is it's a Mesoamerican setting. There's nothing wrong with being generic. Like, if you like something, being able to read that thing you like over and over and over again is fantastic. That's how I feel about dystopian fiction, as I love dystopian, and being able to read that same story over and over again makes me happy. So if young adult fantasy makes you happy, I recommend this because it's got a really cool new setting to it. If you want to hear more about the arcs that I read, the video is linked in the description below. From arcs, let's go over the books that burned me out for February. I did a contemporary romance vlog for Valentine's Day, and man, do I hate contemporary romances. The first book that I read was People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This is a generic contemporary romance, which I don't like. This one wasn't the worst one I read this month, but it did get 2 stars from me. Now, before I really get into bashing all of these books, y'all need to understand that these are popular books, and if you like contemporary romances, like I was just saying earlier, if there's something about a genre that you just like and you want to read books that do it over and over and over and over again, some of these contemporary romances are exactly what you want. But I don't like that thing, so reading something that I don't like over and over again is miserable for me. The next contemporary romance I read was A Lesson in Thorns by Sierra Simone. This promised to be smut, and I thought I was going to like it. Well, I did like it. It did an actual honest-to-God love triangle for the first time I've ever read, and that made me very excited. But this really isn't smut. It's more pining. Like, the main character is an honest-to-God horny librarian, but there's not a whole lot of actual sex scenes in this book, so be prepared going to that. Otherwise, the story is well told. It's not like the most amazing thing I've ever read, but I did enjoy my time with this book, even though I did discover that pining as a literary device is not really for me. From there, I read One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This is a sapphic contemporary romance with a tiny little sci-fi twist. This was a 3-star. Like, I didn't like it, but I wasn't miserable reading it. And I think if you like contemporary romances, this is one of the better contemporary romances that I've personally had to deal with. So I hope that makes it shiny. The only thing that I absolutely hated about this book is they have sex on the New York subway, and that's the nastiest thing. Like, I was like trying not to dry heave the whole time I was reading this, going like, oh my god, the germs, I can't. But other than that, it's a pretty decent book. After that, I thought it would be funny to go to the used bookstore and just pick a romance novel off the shelf based on its bad cover. So this is what I ended up with. This is historical, not contemporary, but when you go to a used bookstore, you're mostly seeing historical, and the historical ones have the best covers. So this, would I recommend this to anybody? No, absolutely not. This is objectively bad, but I had so much fun reading this. Like, I didn't read this as a romance novel, I read it as a comedy, like maybe something mocking romance novels, even though that's not what it's supposed to be. It was so ridiculous, it was funny. Now, after that, I read Desperate Measures by Katie Roberts. This is a Aladdin retelling, but Aladdin is the bad guy and Jafar is the love interest. Which, if you imagine the Disney characters, that doesn't really work out, but when you get into this, you're not really imagining the Disney characters anymore, trust me. This is smut. This, like, starts with a sex scene, and the premise of this is consensual non-consent, which I didn't know was a thing until I read this. Not my kink. The book was, like, the story in itself was actually kind of interesting and very empowering, weirdly enough. And if you like sex scenes in your book, man, does this book have some sex scenes in it. But I enjoyed this enough that I'll probably continue with the series, because I just like these, like, modern kinky Disney princess retellings, if for nothing else than to subvert the idea of a Disney princess. And the last book that I read for this vlog is where everything goes wrong, and that is The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. I knew going into this book that I would hate it, and man, did I hate it. What did this guy ever see in this girl? Like, the main character, the perspective that we're reading from, is stupid and annoying, and she's a horrible person. But we're supposed to read her as a love interest, and I don't understand. Like, yikes. Anyway, I hated this book, and I think I went on a fairly lengthy rant about it in the video that I did on these romances, so if you want to see that rant, check that out. From there, let's talk about all of the books by Black authors that I read in February, since it was Black History Month, and I tried in between, like, the projects that I had going on to read as many books by Black authors as I could. The first one I read was Me, Moth, which was a novel in verse by Amber McBride, and this was so good. It's super short to begin with, and it's poetry. It's basically a black girl who lost her family in a car crash becomes friends with a Native American boy who has been abused by his stepfather, and they become friends at school and then go on a road trip. It's kind of like a very small summary of this book, but it is fantastic. I highly recommend it. I read it, but I think this would probably be really good in audiobook format, and yeah, definitely check this out, especially if you've never read a novel in verse before and you're like, I don't really like poetry. I think you should try this or Clap When You Land, and just have that experience. This was the only book I gave 5 stars the entire month, so if that says anything. Then I read Root Magic by Eden Royce. This book I wanted to read because it follows Gullah Geechee culture in South Carolina on the like coastal islands. And it follows like Jim Crow laws. It follows like the end of Jim Crow laws and racism, but there's not like a whole lot of interaction with white people other than like the police, like the sheriff and the deputy. This book was too young for me, I think is how I'm gonna put it. Like, the story was cool, and the lessons in the history in here is cool, but the book was obviously trying to teach a very young person things. Like how to be good for your parents, keep going to school, listen to your elders as they teach you things. And as a 37, I don't know how old I am, 37-year-old woman, I didn't really need any of that. So I would say if you like reading middle grades or you're looking for a educational book for your kids, I would recommend this. If you are like me and that sounds too young for you, maybe skip this one. From there I read Moonwitch Spider King by Marlon James. This is the book 2 in the Dark Star trilogy, I think is what it's called. That could be wrong. But the first book was Black Leopard, Red Wolf. This is grimdark fantasy, but in an African setting, and it is so good. This is the book that I read, or this is the book that I listened to as an audiobook while reading it, because the way the story is told does not lend well to my inner voice. And listening to Bonnie Turpin tell this story is just so much better. This is an interesting story as well, where you could probably read this book even if you haven't read Black Leopard, Red Wolf, because this is the same story over again from a different perspective, starting about 200 years prior to the start of the first book in the series. I'd still probably read them in order, because Tracker does make an appearance in here, but you don't actually have to. But this was fantastic. 4 stars. Bonnie Turpin's the best audio narrator ever, and I will definitely be reading the 3rd book in this series whenever it comes out, even though I have no idea what to expect from it. Then I read Lemon Color by Bolu Babalola. This is a short story collection of a bunch of mythological, that's the word I'm looking for, love tales retold in a modern setting. Most of the myths that these were based off I didn't recognize, I had never heard before, but the ones I did, I wouldn't be able to recognize the myth from the story, just the names in the story, but it's been retold so much that it's nothing like the original myths as far as I can tell. I didn't particularly care for this. There was too much like cheating and abuse, cheating on current partners and abuse from current partners before they would fall in love with the actual love interest. And then the format's so short, it's really hard to create a compelling and believable love story in such a short format. It's like, why did these people like each other? They've known each other for like a couple of days, and you want me to imagine them being in love for the rest of their lives. So it wasn't for me, but I think somebody who likes mythology and contemporary romance more than I do would probably really enjoy this. Next up after that, I read Twisted, The Tangled History of Black Hair Culture by Emma Dabiri, and this was okay. I did learn a lot. I learned an insane amount about the culture surrounding black hair and also like how racism surrounds black hair. Like we talk about how skin color matters if you are white or black, but people who are light skinned but with obviously black kinky hair are never going to be able to pass. So we really don't judge so much on skin color as we do hair texture. We just don't think about it that way. But while I learned a lot from this and it was educational, I didn't like the writing style. It was very academic, so beware going into that this is a very academic nonfiction, and the author would often go off on tangents that she seemed to struggle to link to black hair, and it just felt like the book didn't come together very well, that it was a bunch of different topics that had a very loose connection, if any. Like they didn't really have a connection, but she would do anything she can to like fake a connection between all of these topics. I hesitate to recommend this book because I've got another book called Hair Story that's also about black hair that may be better, but this is the only book that I've read about black hair so far, so this might be the best one out there. Like I honestly don't know. So hopefully I get a chance to read Hair Story in the upcoming months and I can better recommend one of the two. And if you have other ones that I should read better than both this and Hair Story, let me know. After that, I read Liberty by Caitlin Greenidge. This is very interesting, but had some tropes that I didn't like in there. This basically follows a young girl who is a very dark-skinned black girl. She's free, but she was born just before the Civil War. She's free and lives in Brooklyn, which is a very small one-horse town in New York, at least there. Her mother is a doctor for this town, and she's a black woman, but she's so light-skinned that she could easily pass for a white woman. And most of this book is about this like disconnect between Liberty and her mother, and really and doesn't necessarily speak towards the racism of white people, but speaks towards colorism within the black community, at least historically, and how Liberty's mother might be black, but she is so privileged in her light skin that she doesn't really understand her own daughter and why her daughter is so mad that her mother associates with white people. And so in Liberty's attempt to escape her mother, she marries a very light-skinned man and goes with him to Haiti, and he is awful. And that's the part where it lost me, because I was like, bitch, you met this guy less than 24 hours ago and you're getting married to him and moving to a different country where you don't speak the language. Are you fucking dumb? But parts of this are really interesting. The overall story pissed me off. So we landed at a 3-star on this one. Next up, I read 400 Souls, which was edited by Ibram X. Kendi and Keisha N. Blaine. This is a really interesting concept, that this is a community history of Black America from 1619 to 2019. So 400 years of Black history. And they start at 1619 because the first record, like actual written historical record that we have of Black people in North America is in 1619. And so what this does is it breaks up that 400 years into 4-year periods, and a different author tells a story from each of those for like each 4 years. Some of them are like fictional fantastic stories. Some of them are like essays. And then every 40 years is broken up by a poem by a different author. So the concept of this is so cool. And there was a lot of like Black historical moments that I had never heard about that I learned about in this book. The problem that I had with this is that history doesn't perfectly divide into 4-year chunks. There are going to be 4 years where not a whole lot of stuff happens, and then there are going to be 4 years where way more than one thing happens. I think it's good to read this, especially to be introduced to a shit ton of Black authors that you could go out and explore more. But if you're only going to read one book about Black history, don't make it this one. 2 books left, and these are both miscellaneous books by white authors that I had to read this month. Both of them showed up in my Dungeons and Books TBR. The first of them is House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas, which is the second Crescent City novel, which everybody and their mom has been reading. And I want to tell you, I was mostly disappointed by this. This was boring. This is a whole lot of pages of I am bored and don't give a shit about this world building. But the ending, the last sentence of this book ruined me. It ruined me. Like, what, if you've read this, what do you do with that last sentence? I didn't even like write a review on this. I was just like, I can't. But I will definitely be reading the third book because what the fuck? But also, how the fuck am I supposed to wait 2 years for the third book? So if you have this and you haven't read it yet, I would actually almost caution you to put reading this off as long as you can until the third book comes out, because you're going to die from the last sentence. That's all I got. And the last book I read this month was Reckoning of Fallen Gods by R.A. Salvatore. This is book 2. This is book 2 of his Coven series, and this is interesting. So it's high fantasy, and it's like super freaking generic high fantasy. If you like high fantasy, like R.A. Salvatore's writing, I definitely recommend this series. But one cool thing that I feel like it does is this is like a prehistoric setting. Instead of like a medieval setting, this is very prehistoric. Like everybody lives in like huts. But there is magic. There is magic, there's demons. It's cool. This goes back to what I was saying earlier in this video about like generic things. Like, this is generic high fantasy. If you like generic high fantasy, you're gonna like this book. If you don't like generic high fantasy, you're gonna be like, wow, I've read that story before like 800 times and I don't ever want to read it again. And that is everything I read this month. Thank you for joining me on this long little adventure here. If you've made it this far in the video and you would like to leave me a comment below, leave me a heart emoji for all of the romance that I read this month. And send me good vibes that I get out of my reading slump for March. Because I got a lot of stuff to do in March. I will see you Tuesday for the book haul, and see you all month with different vlogs reading my own TBR shelf. Bye.